Welcome to Dominate Your Day podcast. This is the podcast that adds value to leaders who want to make a difference in the workplace. We believe each person is unique and has a purpose they can live out every day and make an impact in the world. Here at Dominate Your Day podcast, we hear stories from leaders who have used their unique talents to transform themselves and their companies from the inside out.
Welcome everyone to Dominate Your Day. And today we are thrilled to have Jane Hanson with us. You all might recognize her name. She's an award-winning journalist and has spent 30 years at being a reporter and a journalist and someone that as I say, Emmy Award winning. And now she's giving back and helping others in their communication skills. So Jane, welcome. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you so much. It's delightful to be with you. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah. Well, I'm always curious. Okay. So tell me, did you know when you were a young child, you wanted to be this award-winning journalist? Where did this come from?
Well, when I was a little girl growing up, and I grew up in rural Minnesota, in the southwestern part of the state, on the prairie. If anybody remembers Little House on the Prairie, my hometown is just a few miles away from Walnut Grove, Minnesota.
Oh, it is a place, huh? There is a place called Walnut.
There is actually a place called Walnut Grove. And so growing up in the middle, in the middle of the country, kind of in the middle of nowhere, with the prairie grass blowing everywhere, I couldn't wait to get out and explore the world. And my father, when I was really little, would read me newspaper articles, and then we'd talk about what they called then current events, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so all I thought of was, I just want to see history being made before my eyes. And as a result, I became a broadcast journalist. And that's exactly what I did. So I worked for NBC for close to 30 years in New York City, got there obviously when I was very young, which was pretty cool. And it was just an amazingly wonderful time. And I still do some journalism. I still do some things for assorted people or companies. And I also do a lot of work. I write for Forbes. So I still have got the journalistic qualities intact. But what I learned from all of that wonderful, wonderful experience that I had working for NBC, what I learned from that was a very unique ability to communicate and to help people become very clear with their messages, become very clear in how to communicate with others, be it in front of 1,000 people or with just one person. And so I'm using that now to enhance my life and enhance the life of others.
I love that. And I think, Jane, several things in your story, and then I want to get to clear messages, because that's one of my big beefs in the workplace is clarity. And so it sounds like your father was kind of a role model mentor, kind of teaching you about world news and current events. Mm-hmm. But then how did you get from, the rural place where you live to New York City to a major, NBC? And I mean, there was some people in between there that probably mentored you and guided you and helped you on that way.
There were. Well, I went to college to graduate with a degree in broadcast journalism. And back when I started, there were not a lot of women that were in the profession. And so we really, we really had to fight for our spots. And my very first job was in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And I spent a lot of time in Indian reservations. But mind you, I was really young. I was like 20 years old, and I was only there for a short period of time. And then I moved on to another little town or a bigger town, but it was still in the Midwest in Iowa, in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And I got noticed by what they used to call talent scouts that were out around the country looking for young journalists in television. And so my tape got sent out, and it's kind of how I got to NBC. But the real story behind being offered the job I was offered was me thinking that somebody was playing a joke on me. And the phone rang.
Really?
The phone rang, and this guy on the line who identified himself as Ron Kershaw from WNBC TV in New York. And I said, yeah, right. And I hung up on him. And he called, Yes, he called back again, and I said, "Look, I don't know who this is, but it's not funny because I never dreamed that I would be able to jump 72 market sizes in a single move." And so I hung up on him again, and he called back and he said, "Before you hang up, write my number down." So I wrote the number down and then I hung up. And so I called back, and I got, a woman that answered, WNBC TV New York, Ron Kershaw's office. And I went, oh, what have I done? So I find myself, and she started to laugh. And she said to me, no one has ever hung up on him, particularly somebody that's, some young punk kid out in the middle of nowhere. And I said, oh boy.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like mortified. I didn't know what to do. And she was laughing. And she goes, wait, I got to put him on. I can't believe it. And I can hear her going, hey, that kid called back. So I got on the phone with him, and he was laughing too. And he flew me out to New York for an audition and hired me. So it was pretty, it was pretty cool. And, obviously I was green behind the ears when I arrived there. I had an awful lot to learn, and I was working with these amazing veteran reporters and anchors that had been in New York working for a very long time. And I'm forever grateful for their help and their leadership in guiding me along the path. And I learned one tip very early on that I would suggest to anybody who's listening to this, which was, don't be afraid to ask people for help. And it was, so when there was a story that I was going to cover that maybe I didn't know the history of it, and instead of being, a brash know-it-all, like somebody who's 21, 22, 23 sometimes can be, I instead would go to them and say, give me the 911 on this story, or give me the info 411, on this story, and tell me the key issues I need to know. If you can spare the time, please, give me some guidance here, because I want to make sure that I'm doing the best job I can. And I recognize I have an awful lot to learn. And people were just generous. They were so generous with their time, and with their knowledge, and with their experience and their wisdom. And that really helped me tremendously.
Oh, wow. It was funny. I was at an event, a summit, about a month and a half ago for women that had been sex trafficked. And I was sitting in the audience with this woman. And one of the assignments that we had just sitting in the audience was to think about the people in our life that had made a difference in our life. And just to be able to sit there and think about those people when you look back in your career. And for her, this person I didn't know just was telling me, and she was another corporate from representing corporations. And she said it was her father or her grandfather. And they had everybody in the room do that. And it was such a pivotal moment, because I think we move ahead and we get later in our career and we think, okay, who were those people that really helped me early on in my career, or helped me early on? And it was, she's a little tear. She goes, I haven't ever cried about this before, even thought about it. But it's so fun to hear the stories of those, like you're hanging up on the person 3 times before you got there, and how, and then he hired you, and then all the people that are around you, were so generous with you. And that's what's so key right now, right? Is helping this next generation. And we've got 5 generations in the workplace right now. So it's so powerful to how we mentor. So when you're talking right now, and I want to hear some more stories about your time at NBC, because I have a feeling you have a lot of them, between 9/11 and between presidents you've interviewed. So I do want to ask those, but I want to get back to one of the questions. One of the thoughts that you brought up at the very beginning is that you help people bring clarity to their communications.
Yes.
And how do you do that? Because one of the things I'm realizing is we're a very distracted society right now. And
thank you, social media, and thank you. It's such a attention span of somebody in the US today is 8 seconds. Now, that doesn't mean you've lost them, but it means that we are so overstimulated that we have a really hard time being present, and we have a really hard time staying focused.
Yeah.
And so we have to deal with that when you're speaking to anybody, when you're trying to communicate with them. You really have to think carefully, what am I saying, and how am I saying it in a way that's going to sink in, be understood, be heard.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where clarity has to be right front and center. And to have clarity, you have to have, there's three parts of the equation. One is, who are you talking to? Because I could say things that you will understand, maybe because, let's just say I'm having a conversation with you about, like, as a woman, right? Or as a leader. But I might have conversations with somebody who's much younger, like a Gen Zer, who's just beginning their rise up in their career. I'm not going to talk, I might have the same absolute message, but I'm not going to talk to them the same way. I might use different words, I might use different stories, etc. So you have to think about, who am I talking to first? Because that's the first step in resonating. And then, and then the second part is what is the key that I want them to walk away from this conversation with? So we always have to have that key message, because if you don't, then it becomes convoluted. And so if you're having a meeting, or if you're giving a speech, or if you're giving a presentation, or you're having maybe a conversation that is tough or crucial, you have to know before you start the conversation what you want the message to be. So that's the second part. And then the third part that enters into it is how you're saying it. Because if you're not clear with the way you use your voice and your body language and your eye contact and your posture and all of that, then it's still not going to resonate, even if you've got the words pretty down clearly. But if you're still not using all of that innate part of us, the body language part, they're never going to hear it. So it's just, so there's these three key parts that all have to work. They have to play in the same sandbox in order for your communication to work.
So for leaders that you work with, whether they're making presentations or working on just walking in the room and having presence with their personal brand in a meeting, what are some of the things that you are seeing that are common mistakes or errors that leaders are making when they're communicating?
Well, I think many of them don't have that clear message in mind. The second thing is, I think that there's a lack of empathy. And what I mean by that is, you need to put yourself in the other person's shoes before you have a conversation, because that helps you understand how you're going to resonate with them. And we don't do enough of that. And the third thing is, we don't do enough listening.
Yeah. Because
you're going to get a lot of cues from somebody about how they're taking something in if you listen. You know that old thing, I'm sure your mother probably told you this, mine certainly did. You have two ears and one mouth for a purpose. So listen to what I'm telling you.
Yeah.
So that's one of them. I mean, those are mistakes that I see. I also see that what I think is essential that we also are not doing enough of is respecting each other. And respect. And when I talk about respect, it gets back to that putting yourself in the other person's shoes, but it's also thinking, no matter what the conversation is going to be, if it's a tough one, if it's a critical one, if it's with feedback, you still have to have respect. You have to respect what the other person, where they're coming from. And if you don't have that, then nothing is ever going to work.
And I know this is something I see all the time. We're just that self-awareness, walking in the room, being on the phone, some of the nonverbal cues. Do you talk about that as well with your leaders? And what are some tips for like just nonverbal cues to think about when you're communicating with others?
Well, there's a whole lot of different things to think about. There's posture, eye contact, gestures that we're using, facial expressions, things you're doing with your arms. There's a whole lot that enters into that. Simple example. Let's just say if you cross your arms, you are immediately putting a barrier between you and the person or the people that you're speaking to. And it indicates that you are not really interested. So think about something like that. Eye contact. In today's virtual world, you have to have great eye contact when you're doing something like a Zoom or a Google Meets or whatever it is. You have to be looking at the camera instead of looking all over to see how people are reacting to you, because the moment you let your eyes stray, it appears that you're somewhat indifferent. In real life, we want to have great eye contact with the person we're talking to. I bet that you can remember moments where you've been in a room, and let's say there's a whole lot of people in the room and you're kind of networking, you're talking to somebody and they're continually looking over your shoulder. And what you're thinking in that moment is, they're not interested. Now, it could be that that person has to meet someone and they're looking to see when they're coming in the room, but they should tell you that, because what you're thinking, you're creating a whole story in your head that says, I'm not interesting enough. This person doesn't like me. I don't like this person. I think they're being not kind. And so that's bad communication. Our gestures have to be in sync with what we're saying. So we need to think about, how are we using our hands? All of communication is just a conversation. In a conversation like you and I are having right now, we use our hands to illustrate something, for emphasis. But if you don't use your hands and they're very rigid and held by your side, then people instantly think, oh, that guy's a stiff. They're not very much fun. I don't want to be with them. And then, and it's so innate, we don't even know we're making these judgments. We make judgments before somebody opens their mouth.
Right. And I think too, from your training and now how you're training others, of being able to talk in words that have meaning and not a lot of words, right? It's like, and sound bites, I guess you'd say, but also that your body, the way you're carrying yourself and your hands and everything is speaking, not just the words that are coming out of your mouth. And so that's what I'm hearing you say.
Correct.
Yeah.
All has to be in sync with each other. I mean, we've only had a spoken language for 160,000 years. Before then, we communicated as human beings through what we did with our bodies. The flight or fight, how we felt vulnerable, just the way. Think about animals and how they look at each other. They speak a language, but that language is mostly spoken through their bodies.
It's so interesting. We went to an event it was like in California last couple of weeks ago, and they had us turn in our phones at this particular restaurant. And we were all like, wow, and it was okay until it was time to take a picture or, but it made me think, oh my gosh, how even in social situations, people are so used to having that phone and checking it 25 times during, throughout. And whether you're presenting that moment, when everybody's checking their phones and you're trying to make sure everybody's hearing, but they're busy working, trying to get things done. And it becomes kind of one of those things of a habit that I now see very prevalent in the workplace constantly. It's that distraction of their phone. Yeah.
It is. And it can be very distracting when you're trying to talk to people and they have they're looking at their phones. I try very hard to get people to put their phones away. And just, you can ask and you can try, but that's what's going on in their lives. I mean, we're so overstimulated, and honestly, why do we need the phones? It's okay to have the phones to take a picture, but why do we need to have them at dinner? How many times have you seen, like, it drives me crazy, I'll see a couple sitting at dinner and they're each on their phone. They're not talking to each other. Like, what the heck are they doing? Why are they together?
Yeah.
They have nothing to say.
Yeah. And I
mean,
think that's
so
why
important.
the words, and it's whether we're just out of college, just looking for a new job, and we don't even know how to carry on a conversation because we've been texting our whole time, or we're even, I have a 7-year-old granddaughter, and she's like, when do I get my phone? I'm like, I don't think your parents are going to let you have a phone until you're like, 10 or 11. But even then, it's one of those things. So when somebody's able to look you in the eye and communicate in a key way and use gestures that say, I'm here, I'm listening, I care about you, it just moves mountains, I think. And I feel like we're losing that quite a bit. So as you think about the leaders you're working with now and look back at some of the stories of people that you've helped, can you share a story of someone that had a need and how you were able to help them with communication skills? It could have been speaking, it could have been something they were trying to overcome, and how you helped them transform or make a difference by what you've been able to do with them. Because I feel that I hear that in your voice, that that's your calling, as you have created this opportunity to help others right now.
Well, there's so many stories. And obviously
and some you can't tell, right?
Yeah, most of them I actually can't tell because they're really, I signed a lot of confidentiality agreements with people because that's the only way we can really get candid.
Absolutely.
They're preparing for like the launch of a new product, or they're going to take some kind of steps, or maybe it's all about earnings or whatever it is. But I've helped many a person be able to, especially leaders who sometimes have difficulty really being authentic. And there's something about, once they get that job, that CEO job, they somehow feel like they can't be just regular Joe anymore, regular Jane anymore. And so I work hard with them to bring them back in a certain respect to who they've always been, but with higher caliber abilities and skills to communicate. One of the other things that I really work a lot with are these people who become robotic the moment they know they're going to be standing on a stage. So I do exercises with them where I make them, it's like, we can be sitting here having this great conversation, but all of a sudden they're going to be like, today I'm going to tell you about the world. And you want to go, oh, please. So I do exercises with them, and I would challenge some of the leaders out there to try this. And the exercise really is about being as overly dramatic and as excited and passionate about a subject as you possibly can be. And I record it because I use video a lot in my training. I record it and I play it back to them. And I said, you have to be super uncomfortable. I want you to be as uncomfortable as you possibly can be in doing this. And so they deliver part of their presentation in a way where they, I turn the recording off and I say, how did you feel? And they go, like an idiot. I said, okay, now let's look at it. And what they see when it comes back is that they're actually allowing themselves to show their passion. And it's so much more effective than the way they were doing it the first time around. Why? Because they let that kind of, I don't want to call it the inner child, but what they're allowing is how they really feel about something to show. And when we feel, we are persuasive, we are informative, we are educational, we are listened to. So there's this Maya Angelou quote I use all the time in my work. It's, you'll forget how someone makes you, you'll forget what someone said, you'll forget what someone did, but you'll never forget how they made you feel. And so this notion of, how are you making somebody feel? Because think about it logically. I'm not going to buy your product because you just told me it's good, but you make me feel like that product really works. I'm buying it. Look at commercials. So
absolutely.
if you've got somebody who works for you that you've got to have a tough conversation with, until you make them feel that what you're doing is for their own betterment, for their own future, that what you're saying to them is, look, we're in this together. Let's help figure out how we can be better at it. Then you're going to get buy-in, but you're not going to get it by yelling at someone or by, not allowing your own passion for what you're doing to come through.
Wow. And I think that's so powerful. I hear your empathy big time. And I bet when you were in broadcast journalism, that was a key piece of all the different people you had to interview. So tell us a story or two as we get ready to round out. Tell me one of your favorite interviews and why.
Well, I probably tell this story too much, but one of the interviews that resonates the most with me was with Desmond Tutu, the South African anti-apartheid leader. And he was in New York to speak at the UN. And I was doing an interview with him in a park in Lower Manhattan. And, broadcast journalists are usually a little bit impetuous and they're always on the move. And they interrupted the interview. And I'm like, oh, come on, I'm almost done.
Yeah.
And said, no, you really want us to stop it. So they stopped the interview and took him aside and told him that he just won the Nobel Peace Prize. And and so he sat back down and, tears are coming from his eyes and tears are coming from my eyes. And I'm thinking about the magnificence of this human being that's sitting in front of me and not only what he's done for the fellow citizens of the world, but he's a real hero and a saint in some respects. And I felt that moment of greatness, and so that to me is something that has always resonated with me. There's so many stories.
What was a hard one? What was a hard? Because you think about as leaders, there's tough you've got to go have that discussion with somebody. In your case, you had to go interview them, and it might have been a really tough situation.
The hardest day of my life on television was the morning of 9/11. I was the first person to be on the air at NBC. And I was just sitting in the studio, honestly waiting to go to a fashion show. And all of a sudden in my earpiece, I heard the producer say, we think it's a small plane. It's just flown into the World Trade Center. You can see it with the camera we had on the top of the Empire State Building. Start talking. We don't know what's happened, but start talking. So and I'm vamping because at that point we have no idea what's going on. And we still think it's like a little plane that got off course. We have no idea it's a terrorist attack. So we found an eyewitness who was a janitor that was on West 12th Street in Lower Manhattan. And this was probably about a minute and a half to 2 minutes into us going on the air. And he says, it was a big, it was a big plane and it was silver and blue. And he said, and I swear it gunned the engine as it was going into that building. And I saw it smash in, and you got to pray for him because everybody's dead. And he's saying this on live television. And I'm going, oh, like, A, I have nowhere else to go because we have no information at that point. But B, I've just had this man, speculate that everybody has died. It turned out he was actually right. But he says this, and I go, no, his name was Anthony. I said, look, Anthony, we can't speculate about what's happened. But I just want you to, let's drill down into exactly what you saw, because I don't have any other person to talk to. We don't have reporters on the scene. We have no other video. We have nothing. And so we did. And, but then as I finished with him, he again repeated, he said, pray, you got to pray, because nobody could live through that. So anyway, so that day progressed, and I was on the air for almost 8 hours straight. And we just kept watching, and it got worse and worse, worse and worse. I mean, it chokes me up even to talk about it. I'm grateful that I didn't know in those first moments that I went on television what was going to happen next. But I knew my job, and my job at that moment was to get anybody who was watching us out of harm's way, and to tell them what to do, and try to, and try to, I mean, because the city was immediately shut down.
Mm.
And we just, it was just, and we didn't know, for a while we thought the mayor was dead. We thought all this stuff had happened, but because we just didn't have information. And getting through that day and not allowing myself, because I lived in New York City.
Mm.
I had friends who worked in those buildings. I was personally affected by it, but I needed to make sure that I could keep myself in a place where I was composed and controlled, because if I fell apart, that would have been the end of it for anybody who was watching us, because they would have fallen apart as well. And I knew my job that day, and I did it.
Wow. That is such a hard, I feel your empathy, and I feel I can't even imagine what that was like that day. But what you're describing to me, in having been in the airline business and knowing what that day felt like on the other end, and then knowing what it feels like to be a leader in crisis. And if you don't have it together, your team is not going to want to follow you. Right.
Exactly.
And so you had to get yourself in that frame of mind to say, I've got to be there for all these people today. And what a tough day. Wow. And I saw all the accolades you got from the fire department and all the things from that day, but oh, how tough that was.
It was tough. But it was my job, and we had to do it. And at one point, when they still weren't sure if there were any more planes up there, our bosses walked in and said, because we were in Rockford 30 Rock, an iconic city building, and they said, there's a possibility that a plane could be headed here. So if you want to leave. And I thought, we're on the 6th floor. They're never going to get to us. So
wow. So you stayed?
Oh, yeah.
Wow. What moments, what great moments. And look at how all that experience is helping you help others right now in this next generation of people that need to have a clear message. They're in leadership positions and all that. So I think it's great what you're doing. And I think it's so well needed in the workplace. As we get ready to close out, is there anything that's coming up for you now that I didn't ask that you just want to make sure you share with our audience?
Well, I am, I'm continually trying to improve the services that I offer, which are both presentation coaching, media coaching, video coaching. I have some online courses, and a new one that's all about body language is coming out.
Oh, good.
So that will be, and I really, if you take the time and the opportunity to learn what your body is saying, it's going to help you so much in how you can be with everybody, including your children, your significant other, and whoever, whatever job you're in, it will really help you. So think about what you can do on a daily basis. And I take it one step at a time, just one little thing every single day that you can do that's going to make you communicate better, and it will help. I promise.
I love that. I've started saying to my husband, I want to see your eyeballs. He'll be, yes, honey. I'm like, wait, I need to see your eyeballs. So that's one little thing I'm trying, Jane, but
good.
Thank you for the encouragement.
Keep going.
Keep going. Well, I loved having you on the show today. Thank you so much for your stories and sharing your wisdom, and best to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Good. Okay.
You have been listening to Dominate Your Day podcast. If you're ready to transform your life and workplace from the inside out, go to danawilliamsco.com and set up a discovery call. We would love to connect with you and equip you with some helpful resources. Thank you for listening today, and please take a moment to subscribe to Dominate Your Day wherever you listen.